So I was just saying, Max, we were just talking about how Vivek's nerd versus jock tweet really missed the mark, and how there needs to be an alliance instead of this shaming.
Yeah, I thought it was crazy. Just because, there's more to America than just sort of studying more. And maybe the real sort of superpowers are the nerd jocks.
Well, speaking of alliances, we did want to talk about what does this mean for the tech right and the nationalist right? This was a sort of unification that happened out of expedience for the election. And now that the election has been decided, and now that the left is basically off Twitter, it's just the tech right and the nationalist right duking it out on X. This seems to be the first kind of major fight. Do you think this is a self-contained kerfuffle that doesn't really, change the needle or anything? Or do you think this makes its way back to big T and influences things in any direction for anybody?
Well, I would like to challenge the premise that it was out of expedience, and that sort of informs my answer, which is that I don't think that the sort of there are certainly some cases in the tech world where it was out of expedience, but I think that broadly speaking, it was sort of a big shift, and that therefore, neither party is going to sort of dump the other very quickly, and that maybe this was more well thought out, then it was just going to fall apart on a whim. And one of the sources of this sort of theory that it's all falling apart rapidly are the Never Trumpers, the true Never Trumpers. I mean, Bill Kristol and the Bulwark and what, and these people don't know what a sort of Trump alliance looks like, because they're projecting what they want to be true as their sort of analysis, which is that, Elon and Trump are going to have this big blow up. Is it true that like there are some tech people who are blowing up with the MAGA people? Absolutely, but I don't think it's nearly as dramatic as the Bulwark or Bill Kristol would want you to believe.
So we think the coalition holds, and it's kind of like Sachs said in his tweet, hey, can we, we're aligned on like 90% or 95% of immigration policy. We all want to sort of stop the illegal influx. We might disagree on sort of the margins around some of the high skilled stuff, but there's more or less, 90% agreement.
I mean, yeah, I don't think that David Sachs was going into the White House planning to quadruple the number of immigrants that are coming in from India. It's certainly true that there are people within this Trump world that have been pushing for this. But I think the idea that this was on the list of priorities in the first place is sort of dubious. And I think that almost everyone would agree that you have to do illegal immigration enforcement first before getting to any sort of resolution on the desires for fixing.
If you guys will remember, Trump himself, and he might have just been being glib or made a gaffe, but he went on all in and he said anyone with a green card or anyone with a college degree should get a green card.
Yeah. And like the thing is, very few Americans are venture capitalists and very few Americans are white nationalists, right? And so like
the two genders,
it's just
very many white nationalists are venture capitalists.
It's stuff I was talking to a friend once and he was like, dog, you can never lose your phone because it's like the contacts list is just crazy. It's like, yeah, probably, yeah. But like, no, I mean, look, it's there's this funny thing that has happened in the last, I would say, 10 years where a lot of people are exploring lots of radical ideas about how to order life, right? Like why life is ordered a particular way. And they're looking for ARB, they're looking for alpha, like they want to find like what the next thing is. And a lot of, it's like that famous Peter Thiel question, what very important truth do few people agree with you on? Like, why do you think about this hidden truth? There are a lot of hidden truths or observations about social organization in the United States that like really only the hard right has done any serious thinking on. And they're kind of like totally verboten in the public mainstream because they sort of run up against post-war consensus liberalism, right? So like HBD is one of those things that, the difference between men or women or different population groups, like all of that is like one of those things, right? And these observations, it's like, how operationalizable are they? That's that high IQ immigration problem stuff. how easily can they be translated into policy, right? And the answer is often like not very easily, right? Like Rob K. Henderson is a great dude. He'll post like a lot of these studies and he'll be like, yeah, it turns out women really are like more neurotic and safety minded than men, and men really are actually more open to experience and like, a little bit more resilient when bad things happen. And, one conclusion that you might get from that is probably actually mostly men should be, in the leadership of the military, and maybe not actually mostly women. And maybe this extends to like other questions. But in practical reality, you're never going to get the votes to do something like that, right? Like it's something that we can be aware of. And like, it's good actually for us to be aware of it. And we should be aware of it. And like, we shouldn't cancel people for speaking frankly about it. But it's probably not going to be top-down policy, right? Like there's just a lot of mechanical legal stuff and political stuff that it's going to interface with. So I think it's good that this discussion is happening. Whether it turns into policy, like I'm sure Big T is aware. I'm sure Big T is aware that Big E and Big V are in like a big spat right now with a lot of his online supporters, his keyboard warriors as he calls them. And I'm sure that, for a guy like Trump, like when he said this on the All In podcast, this idea of everyone that graduates from college, we staple a green card to their diploma or something, I think is the Chamber of Commerce line. That's a very common line. Like Charlie Kirk has said that in the past, like other people have said that in the past. And it, is that going to happen? Like, again, like these things actually have to be translated into policy and votes. And then like, Max was just shaking his head and like, yeah, that's correct. It's not going to happen. Like, it's just,
although I don't think it was glib when Trump said it. I think it reflects.
Yeah. I think he probably really means it. Yeah. Like
the thing about Trump is that he's been saying the same things for 40 years. And this is one of them. He does have this sort of.
This is one of those.
He does have.
Right?
He shares half of the sort of Reagan immigration vision, which is that he still believes you cannot go to France and become a Frenchman line, but you can come.
Yeah, exactly.
He disagrees totally on the sort of hordes of people coming in illegally, and Trump has a process objection. Basically, he's really offended by the chaos, which is sort of how you get this. We need to pause until our representatives can figure out what is going on.
Until we got to shut it down, right? We got to shut it down until, yeah. And so like, this is one of those times where I would tell people like, look, all of you emotionally labile people who are having this big shitfest and like fighting with each other on Twitter, you need to look towards the even-keeled, emotionally mature, stable genius of Donald Trump and just follow his lead. Like, I'm being cutesy and saying that, right? But literally just chill. Like Trump and Vance have got this shit, right? Like JD Vance had this great tweet where he was, I'm saying tweet again. I apologize, Elon. I mean posts. He had this great post where he said, look, some people have had this idea that we make America better by ruining American wages by having foreign cheap labor. We're not going to do that. And then he like immediately posts like, here I am with my family on Christmas making biscuits. Like, you guys need to get a life, right? He didn't say you guys need to get a life, but like he kind of like is doing that. And I remember when Trump picked JD Vance, and a lot of people in the online right were like, no, why did he pick JD? They're going to call JD weird. Oh, and they were like catastrophizing. And I don't think this is quite that, because immigration really is a central issue, and I don't want to discount that importance. But very frequently, the online right will work itself into a frenzy, and they're just it's not that they're dumb and doing it because they can't control themselves. It's just that they're operating in this totally virtual.
I'm going to interrupt you, Bronson. It's because this is their mediosphere, and the phenomenon of this on the left is the importance with which CNN panelists discuss things. It's correct. Like there are like 100,000 people watching this panel, 50,000 of them in airports, and you'll have CNN analysts like screaming at one another because this is the conversation that they perceive to be important. Or on Morning Joe in the mornings, basically. The right wing doesn't really have those, and so the communal experience now is the timeline, which is why I think that there's such a fever pitch. You saw this conflict on the left in the period between the debate and the switcheroo in late June and early July on left-wing cable TV, this like visceral conflict playing out. It's just different media at this point.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. And
I want to say one other thing about the staple a green card. The staple a green card thing is a terrible idea because it's basically opening the door for nonsense. But it does reflect Trump's intuition on this, which is that he's always paired, the wall and the big beautiful door, the people pouring in versus the line of people who are waiting orderly. So I don't know how he came up with that idea. I don't know whether it was something that had been suggested to him. But one thing that I've always understood the Trump message to mean is that he's not intending to, be a lunatic on this. What he really, 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 really hates is the illegal immigration, the border, the drugs, because those are the things that he sees as most directly impacting the people. And I'd love to talk about Trump's different remarks on wages throughout the years as well, but that's sort of a second.
Well, just while we're on it, say more. But what do you mean?
When Trump used to be asked about the minimum wage, he would always say, "Look," and I'm paraphrasing. Low wage is better than no wage because there are no jobs, and so he's always been obsessed at the total number of jobs as a metric. He said his greatest wish in the universe was to be the greatest jobs president that God ever created. He views this as a real thing. And so one of the things on immigration and sort of this corporate element is that Trump is sort of a corporate guy. He likes big companies. He likes the massive nature of them. You see that with his sort of desire to have the tech CEOs ingratiate themselves to him. And the total number of jobs that are coming out of these things is really attractive to him. And so he's not going to be against anything that he thinks will increase the total number of jobs. You see this with his the first guy that he put up for labor secretary in 2017. His nomination didn't end up going through, but it was Andy Puzder. It was like a fast food restaurateur. And this was like an original Trump guy. And the fast food restaurateur is someone that Trump likes. And this is in a way sort of an anti-populist thing, but Trump thinks it's very good for society if there's a lot of low-wage entry jobs. And I don't think that all of the supporters today would agree with that element of Trump, but I see that very clearly.
I think if it were stated differently, they would agree with it, right? Like one of the things that I think I mentioned in our part 2 that's like kind of fucked up with immigration visas or just like work permit visas is that a lot of jobs that would have been done by young Americans for relatively low wages are now done by immigrants for even lower wages, right? And it's like that kind of social distortion. It's like, remember being 16 when your knees were perfect and you could just do without sleep? And it's like, yeah, that's the kind of person, it's like we do want them working at many different places. It's kind of what they're for, right? I totally agree with what you're saying, but I think maybe that part of the American sensitivity about this, part of the voter sensitivity about this is they would have been fine with the idea of, we're just getting geniuses that are paid like high wages, right? And Trump actually had that in his first term, but they see both in a procedural way, like a manipulated procedural way, and then in their own lived reality, it's like, a lot of the times the legal immigrants, it's like someone has actually pulled a fast one and it's just like a very narrow private benefit instead of like a broader societal benefit.
Hey, we'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors. What does the future hold for business? Ask 9 experts and you'll get 10 answers. It's a bull market. It's a bear market. Rates will rise or fall. Can someone invent a crystal ball? Until then, over 41,000 businesses have future-proofed their business with NetSuite by Oracle, the #1 cloud ERP, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, HR into one fluid platform. With one unified business management suite, there's one source of truth, giving you the visibility and control you need to make quick decisions. With real-time insights and forecasting, you're peering into the future with actionable data. When you're closing the books in days and not weeks, you're spending less time looking backwards and more time on what's next. If I had needed this product, it's what I'd use. Whether your company is earning millions or even hundreds of millions, NetSuite helps you respond to immediate challenges and seize your biggest opportunities. Speaking of opportunity,
Download the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning at netsuite.com/Zen. The guide is free to you at netsuite.com/Zen. netsuite.com/Zen. Even if you think it's a bit overhyped, AI is suddenly everywhere, from self-driving cars to molecular medicine to business efficiency. If it's not in your industry yet, it's coming fast. But AI needs a lot of speed and computing power. So how do you compete without costs spiraling out of control? Time to upgrade to the next generation of the cloud. Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, or OCI. OCI is a blazing fast and secure platform for your infrastructure, database, application development, plus all your AI and machine learning workloads. OCI costs 50% less for compute and 80% less for networking. So you're saving a pile of money. Thousands of businesses have already upgraded to OCI, including Vodafone, Thomson Reuters, and Suno AI. Right now, Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to OCI for new US customers with minimum financial commitment. Offer ends March 31st. See if your company qualifies for this special offer at oracle.com/turpentine. That's oracle.com/turpentine.
Let's zoom out a little bit. Max, we did it, we had Bronson on before and he shared his sort of take on immigration. I'm curious for your immediate reactions to the discourse over the past few days on the topic, and then maybe you could share where you stand on it.
So the thing that I've learned the most is that I don't think I fully appreciated the extent to which H-1B and H-2B abuse takes place, and how outside of California, almost all of the H-1B sort of applications are being filed by companies whose sole job is to outsource. And that to me is a system demanding to be disrupted because it's clearly not competitive and it's all India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. It's a few companies. I'm generally very inclined to be pro-immigration. But at this point, I think that the thing that I think now that I didn't think a few days ago is that America would be fine if H-1B went away altogether. I would want it to be replaced by something strong that would allow in decent numbers of people. I think that the current numbers are quite sustainable. And that's where I probably diverge most from the immigration restrictionists, is that I think that the current state of things is quite good, but America is so far ahead of everyone else that if it slowed down a little bit, I don't think that we're at serious risk of losing our competitive edge, especially if it's the mostly scammy businesses that are losing the ability to do this.
So you're basically saying the stakes are low either way, basically, on the H-1B one?
I think that the stakes are slightly lower just because we have all sorts of immigration laws, and I'll say one thing that I sort of disagree with most on my side, so to speak, which is the pro-immigration side, is the idea that India should be given special privileges because it's very big. India has 1.5 billion people now. Like, even the smallest percentage imaginable is going to be very large when you compare it to the size of the US immigration system that's been set by Congress over and over again. And it's like, the numbers have gone up, but the numbers have gone up still on the order of six figures per year for these types of things. And so I don't have a great deal of sympathy for the idea that the Indian green card wait is long. It's going to be long because they have 1.5 billion people, and America gets to set those caps. And so I'm offended by the rhetoric that is, India is going to completely take over this system, which they're not going to be able to do it. Congress doesn't want this. Americans don't want this. It happened in Canada and the United Kingdom, though. And I think that the results speak for themselves, which is that it's absolutely crushed public trust.
That's what Sriram was trying to get rid of, right? Which is the country caps, and you.
And I think I did an impression on our first appearance where I was like, I'll do it again if you ask nicely. Where it's like, sometimes a lot of Indians are like, but what about the country caps, right? What about the country caps, sir?
Maybe the cap should be higher, but it should be set by Congress in a very transparent way. You can't uncap it. And that is something that Yeah, I would disagree with Sriram on.
Yeah, it's like, and I think maybe Sriram was talking about. I don't know. Like, I would have to go look it up. Like, I'm on a lot of podcasts. I don't actually watch or listen to podcasts. I like wait for people to clip parts of them, put them on Twitter. I'm just being like real. Sorry. But like, and so, like, I don't know what he was actually advocating for, but I would bet that he probably wasn't talking about the H-1B country cap. I would bet that he was talking about.
It's the green card. It's the green card cap.
No. Yeah. I think he was maybe talking about like the green card cap, and like even that, like I would still. I don't know. Like I'm very sympathetic to the idea that we should have, because this used to be a part of American law. In fact, it's one of the few times that Congress was able to override a veto. Like, people know about the presidential veto power, but what they don't know is that Congress can actually override the president's veto. It hasn't happened that many times, but one of the times it happened was the passage of what is called the McCarran Walter Act of 1954. Senator McCarran, whom, by the way, we should rename the airport in Las Vegas for, not Harry Reid International, it's McCarran International. Okay. And what it did is it established per country quotas on naturalization to basically say, like, look, anyone can naturalize, we can accept that, but like, it's only a certain number of people per country per year, like relative to the US population. Because what we don't want to have, and I think Senator McCarran said this, we don't want to have indigestible ethnic blocks in the country. Like, we don't want to have basically the perpetuation of completely foreign identity and social life in little parts of the country. Like, he wasn't saying you can't have a little Italy, but he is saying that, like, it would be weird actually, like a huge swath of the country was just like fundamentally un-American. And like, I don't know if you guys have ever been to Edison, New Jersey, or if you ever have cause to go there, but it's a little weird. It's like a little weird, right? On the other hand, it's probably why Trump's numbers in New Jersey were so good in the last election.
Trump killed it in the Indian suburbs of New Jersey,
because they were all like, "Yeah, we're gonna." Yeah, and so it's like there's a balancing act here, but I'm ethnically Indian, right? And when I go there and people are talking to me in Hindi instead of English, I feel weird. I feel weird about it, right? So I can't imagine like a regular American wouldn't feel weird about it. So like I could see where people are like, the green card caps are different from the H-1B caps, but like, I don't know, it's good for everyone to speak the same language.
I don't think that the H-1Bs are capped by country. The cap is the percentage at which those H-1Bs can convert to green cards. And so the green card success rate across the board for all types of visas is like 4%. It's much, much lower than that for an Indian on an H-1B. But here's the thing. It's a non-immigrant temporary work visa for a reason. We have uncapped immigrant visas if you can prove certain things. And maybe the bureaucratic red tape around those is not great. But people who have some connection to the U.S. or a U.S. employer who's really willing to vouch for this person and pay for legal fees, they can get an O1. Now, every once in a while, you have people like an Elon. Elon did literally have an H-1B, and so one of the arguments for having such a program at a capped level, as it was in 1991, is that every once in a while you get someone who has a power law effect on the economy, and Elon is, example A. I don't know what the other sorts of visas for some of these famous people were, but like, is it worth 100,000 people for one Jensen Huang? I would argue that it totally is. And the rate at which the H-1Bs convert to permanent residence is so low, but that's just sort of a fact of life. The American people have decided that they don't want huge levels of immigration. And so Congress hasn't increased, the green card process. On the question of whether, I don't think that Sriram was advocating for this in his new capacity. I think that that's one of the things that's sort of, David is exactly right when David said Sriram was hired to work on AI and crypto policy. She's very good at. And it's clear the sort of rest of the personnel element in the executive office of the president is not on board with this. You don't put Stephen Miller in charge of this if you're planning on subcontracting it out to David and Sriram. I think it's fine that that's what Sriram thinks. I happen to disagree with it, mostly because of the Canadian experience. I think that Canada went too fast, And now they have a double-digit percentage of the population that's foreign-born and a high single-digit that's foreign-born and arrived quite recently. And there are entire suburbs of Ontario and British Columbia where it's been a negative experience for the residents, and it's having sort of perverse effects on the local economy. I think it's something that they'll sort out. But ultimately, I'm against it. One person who was for this pretty notably a few years ago was Senator Mike Lee, Republican of Utah, and a very right-wing guy. And he sponsored a bill to end the sort of country by country caps. I'm not sure if he would introduce that law today. It probably has less appeal, but part of it has got to be the Canadian experience as sort of informing the analysis here.
There's actually it's like a crazy photo, and it's Senator Michael Lee just surrounded like by throngs of Indians.
There are a lot of Indians. It's not that crazy.
Yeah, right. Yeah, he's being thronged by all of these Indians who are like, yes, Senator Lee, our guy. And
as far as interest groups go, it's not the worst. Extremely productive, contributing a lot. On balance, I'm still against.
I haven't started my organized crime arc yet. You might. we're gonna apply B2B SaaS to meth sales, and the sky's the limit. No, I don't want to be totally glib, but like I think that the perception is much more the reality. Like it's true that you're totally correct that Trump is not putting Sriram in charge of immigration policy. He has someone like Stephen Miller for that. And it's true that he's going to be working on AI policy, and people are blowing it out of proportion. But I think the real rancor is like the response from so many, tech leaders has been to like point out that, well, Americans are uneducated, or Americans are lazy, or like, this is a real skill issue and you guys are entitled and stuff like that. Like there's been a lot of, even if, Trump world has its shit together and is going to like do fine and do all these great things, there is like a real meaty anger between these two factions that I think is playing out on X right now.
I totally agree. And I think it's probably much less acute in real life, Americans between Americans. But yeah, the scale of the dispute within the sort of Twitter sphere has been pretty dramatic to see.
What do you think, like if you had to predict the coalitions that are going to have power in Trump's sort of administration in terms of who's going to set the ideas, there's been, there are sort of different factions. Who would you be bullish on or bearish on in terms of, in the next year or two, what faction is going to have more power, what faction is going to have less power, if you had to predict going forward?
I don't think of it that way. I think that Trump's immigration team are going to be the people that Trump puts in charge of immigration. And I think that their mandate is pretty clear, right? We're going to have the largest deportation operation in history. It's the second thing in the Trump agenda. I think there will probably be some attention at some point to making sure we can get a couple more Elons in. But I don't think there is really another faction besides the Trump faction on immigration.
Except to the extent that Trump himself diverges from what we call the sort of Trump constituency. Like that's the other faction, is Trump saying staple a green card to the diplomas. Again, yeah, you're right. It's Stephen Miller versus Trump's sort of Slovenian wife, American corporatist liberal instincts, basically. Which is that I'm sure that someone has already told him, sir, we're not going to start stapling green cards, but like he's going to want something on that front. And certainly Trump is not about to do what some of his online supporters want to do and do a legal, immigration moratorium. I don't think that Trump's ever thought about doing that.
And I mean, even broader than immigration, like where else does Trump sort of?
I mean, okay, I'll give an answer. This one is very, very sort of falsifiable, I think. I think that Bronson is right, that the different departments are sort of compartmentalized. And that's part of what it means to be in an administration or a coalition, is that you're compartmentalized. Maybe David Sachs would rather be influencing Ukraine policy. I don't think he's going to. I think that you've got all these different people. The one person who seems to have Trump's ear across all of them is Elon. And I think that the significance of the Trump-Elon alliance is is still understated. And Trump's post this morning, this sort of cryptic, possibly accidental post, where are you? We miss seeing you and little X. This is what Trump is, and by the way, Bill Gates is coming over. Like, where are you? This is Trump's sort of remark. While much of the online right is very upset at Elon, and Bronson said earlier, Trump totally knows what has happened with Elon and Vivek over the last 48 hours. He 100% knows. And what was his response? Bill Gates is coming for dinner. Where are you? I haven't seen you. He really wants to ask Elon about it. And Elon, there were all these funny stories where the president of Serbia called Trump and was surprised when Elon was on the line, and the Bezos meeting. And so all of this is sort of very disparate, but Elon appears to be, so that's the prediction that I want to stake out, just because of the conventional wisdom that the blow up is inevitable. Like, the blow up was inevitable between Trump and John Bolton or Nikki Haley, but that's because there was no significance to the alliance in the first place. There was no weight to them actually getting together. And with Elon, it was ride or die. I don't think that's going to, go away so soon.
One of the things that I've noticed is that, both Trump and Elon Musk, I think the reason they get along so well is because, they're kind of the same person. They're the same type of person. Everyone has heard those stories of Elon Musk will go and sleep in the factory so that his engineers know that I am literally with you. Even if you're doing shift work, I'm also there, right? But these stories also exist for Trump. Trump used to, for all of his hotels, he would walk the halls of every one of his hotels. He would look to see what the guest experience was. He would work with the housekeeping staff to make sure everything was perfect, right? They both have this kind of, again, Elon, Trump, if you're listening, I'm not saying this disparagingly, but they both have this kind of childlike autism wonder thing going on, where they become fixated on the details and making sure things are correct. And they're very physical men. They will go and do the thing without they're not the kind of person who'll be maybe I'll email that guy and learn about it. They're no, I want to look at the machine, right? It's very endearing. And I think that's why they get along. They have that same sort of thing. So
and Trump went to work at McDonald's. That was a big sort of declaration.
Yeah. Seeing Trump being very careful and fascinated with the fries, it's he's got a touch of the tism, and it's great, right? He really, he wanted to make sure he was doing it correctly, and it's probably my favorite thing about both.
Yeah, just the other day, Trump at his press conference is talking about all the countries calling him, and he says, "You wouldn't believe how many countries there are." The man is still amazed at the presidency, and it's part of the reason why people think he's actually sort of in touch rather than out of touch. It sort of is like Joe Rogan, where he's sort of asking the questions, has some wonder at the world. I do think that I think that they're very alike, in their sort of very, very unique personalities with outsized effects on large groups of people, sometimes in ways that the mainstream is totally unwilling to accept as being real, where it's these are the two most sort of active men in America.
Imagine we're doing this podcast again sort of a year and a half from now, and sort of gearing up for the midterms. I know predicting is very hard to do. But how do you think it's gonna shake out in terms of who's not going to be happy with what happens, who is going to be happy with what happens? How does this differ practically from sort of Trump 1? Predictions are always difficult, but Max, why don't you take a step?
Okay, I think that the people who are most fixated on dramatically expanding high-skilled immigration are going to be unhappy. Dramatically expanding legal immigration are probably going to be unhappy. And the people who want a moratorium are going to be unhappy. But I think it's totally reasonable that we get large numbers of deportations, courts that finally allow Trump to do that, and a sort of continuing alliance between the Elon world and the Trump world. That's my basic set of predictions, and that's because the status quo is pretty good for most parties, and stopping the border invasion today is like the biggest political part.
And do you think that will do well in the midterms?
I have no reason to believe that the GOP will do well in the midterms, especially at the House level. The Senate map is a disaster for Democrats, but that's mostly just based on sort of political polarization. So I think it's probably a pretty sure bet that the Democrats will do well in the House election in 26. The GOP has a majority of 2 seats, and some of those seats were won by hundreds of votes. And 2024 was the election in which Trump got shot and got more votes than any Republican had ever had. I would predict that the Democrats take the House, that the Republicans win the Senate. That's the way the math looks to me.
Yeah, it's very, very difficult to maintain House majorities. It's not impossible. It does happen, but like today's climate, it's probably pretty tough unless the economy improves dramatically. If the economy improves dramatically and like kind of close actually to the elections, and people feel really positive about the country because of that, which is itself like, I don't make economic predictions, then yeah, I think they could hold the House, but it'd be still also very narrow.
If we had sub 1% interest rates somehow by the end of 20,
right? Yeah, who knows?
That would be the world in which they're like super competitive. But I think that one sees the future, which is that GOP Senate candidates did okay, but especially in states where they're really Republican, and so those were the main pickups: Montana, West Virginia, and one of the sort of swing state Republicans won the Senate race. So voters were not crazy about them. The House races went much better for Democrats, and part of that is, the sort of House GOP drama that started with McCarthy, the leadership fiasco, Speaker Johnson, now the whole continuing resolution thing. I don't think that any of that bodes well for being a House Republican.
And Max, do you think that the Democrats moderate and become closer to the center, or do you think they, in fact, get more extreme on the left, maybe from a class perspective instead of the woke perspective?
I think they probably lean into the class thing because of the sort of Elon worth $500 billion. And if Elon is on paper worth 600 or 700 billion by the time that next year comes around, I think that is unfortunately a very potent argument that Bezos and Elon want to take away your freedom and cozy up to Trump. I don't think that they would run a sort of national trans election again. Maybe.
Max, I feel like you're something of a Trump scholar, or certainly appreciator of his quirks and personality traits. Like, what do you think is?
I think he is a Trump scholar.
What do you think is underappreciated?
I consider myself
or misunderstood?
I'm hoping to volunteer at some point for the National Archives and Records Administration when it's time to construct the Trump library. I have some ideas.
But what do you think is misunderstood about Trump, or not fully appreciated, or where do we just misunderstand the man?
Who's we?
Sort of the average, our peers. I don't know, the average sort of smart person, let's say in tech. I don't know.
I think I would sort of go back to the point about like the hotels. Trump knows a lot of stuff. He knows about different stones, so he can look at a building and like know what type of rock it's been made out of because he built a lot of stuff. Yeah, I think that in general people underappreciate the extent to which Trump's long decades of experience inform his politics rather than some other factor. I'm not sure if that's a very good answer. He's got. Okay, here's a better answer. Trump is the most famous person on the face of the earth, which is what he sort of deeply wants. But it's not a sort of traditional celebrity, not just because he's able to like empathize with the working class or whatnot, but because he actually knows a lot of stuff. And so he takes his knowledge seriously and is offended by someone saying he's wrong. And he doesn't actually have vain interests. He has very sort of knowledge-based interests. So I think I think that most people don't think of him as a figure like that, but I sort. And the Stones thing to me is one of the most sort of potent ones, just because he'll see them all over the place. I don't know. I'm not sure if that's a good answer. Maybe I understand him too well to be able to answer it properly.
Well, one that's obvious to you, but maybe not obvious to all our listeners, is sort of, when you call him Shakespeare, or just talk about how he's the most quotable.
Okay, yeah. The language thing is real. I mean, he writes these sort of like Tolstoyan sentences, but then he adds in like certain nouns will be capitalized. Country, he started capitalizing. Election, he started capitalizing at a certain point. He sort of makes these different things sacred in order to sort of build his ethics into the posts themselves. And then, of course, there's just the reason I make the Shakespeare comparison is just because of how many new words and phrases directly come from Shakespeare. Window, to be or not to be, many. Yeah. So Trump, it's like many such cases. Many people are saying, I've been hearing fake news. He sort of heard this new phrase and was like, let's give it a different turn. And so, in 2015-16, fake news meant, made up stuff that was being disseminated by sort of Russian organizations. And Trump was like, well, these people are making up stuff. And so he calls it fake news. And at the time they were like, no, it's not fake news. This refers to that other thing. But now the convention of the term is almost universally a derogative for the press. And so they moved on to misinformation, because he ended the use of fake news by adopting the term himself. He tried doing that with misinformation. It didn't quite work. But one in which it did work was threat to democracy. He says, Biden, no, you're a threat to democracy. And you see the sort of MAGA people online adopting the language convention. And so that's sort of the poetic element. And then it's like this, one of my favorite phrases that Trump coined was when he was being deposed in the E. Jean Carroll lawsuit. This sort of crazy writer accuses him of fondling her in the Bergdorf Goodman, which is the department store outside of Trump Tower. And he's being deposed. And the lawyer asks him about when you're a star, they let you do it remark. Yeah, you can grab them by the... And he says, well, that's historically been true, for millions of years. And then he says, unfortunately, or fortunately. And what was so unique about that is, who says unfortunately or fortunately? Usually it'd be the other way around, but it was just sort of this. And so it's just sort of said what he was thinking. It was linguistically unique. And I think that is very sort of special about Trump. And the extent to which he's affected like Zoomer speak is still underappreciated, not just like the fake news thing, but the many people are saying, wow, I'm just hearing that now for the first time. Like, that's a classic. It's like everything's a movie scene.
Yeah. He really, one of the best ways to see this is to watch so he's done so many rallies, and you can actually watch a lot of them. If you just trawl YouTube, like, people will record him and upload the recordings, and you don't always get it from official sources, but you can watch. And so I'll do this sometimes, because he'll just freestyle for 3 hours from place to place to place. He's done hundreds and hundreds of rallies. Here is one. This is from 2023. This is Trump in Las Vegas, noting the difference between Nevada and Florida. And I'm reading, this is real. Remember, Florida is easier than other places. You have the ocean and you have the sun. There's something about that works. You have the sun too, but you don't have the ocean. I can tell you, you definitely don't have the ocean. Maybe someday you'll have the ocean. You never know. Someday. Hopefully it's a long time away, right? And it's like, is this like Rumi? Who? Someday you'll have the ocean, Nevada, but hopefully not for a long time. It's like, what did he mean by this?
Trump did a rally somewhere in Minnesota once, and it was I think it was Superior, Wisconsin. It was one of these towns that's on one of the Great Lakes. And he's remarking that the Great Lakes look like oceans, but they don't have sharks. And Trump is sort of obsessed with sharks. And so he's complimenting them that you have this ocean-like thing. It doesn't have sharks. Yeah, he has all these intuitions and says them. And maybe maybe this will be my revised answer for what's the most misunderstood thing. Most of what Trump was doing at the rallies in 2016 was just sort of saying stuff that he knows rather than focusing on like exclusively policy. And so someone would be insulting him on cable news and he'd be like, oh, well, let me tell you what this person said to me in 1987. And it was because he knew all of these people that he was able to muster the stories. And he's been everywhere that he knew all of this stuff. And then it would go into the political stuff, whereas most politicians just have to explain what bills they've worked on or what ideas they've had. And none of these people have had lives like Trump has had, like a Chuck Schumer. Like Schumer goes to law school, gets elected to the New York Assembly, and then works in different political jobs his entire life. It's like the only people that he's ever met are left-wing celebrities and politicians, and it's always been in that context. And one of the reasons why Trump was so effective against Hillary was because he actually knew her. He knew her from many years ago. She was at his wedding. And this is like a totally bizarre occurrence. And it's part of why the whole Clinton world was so shocked that it worked.
Max, well, we do have you, speaking of another topic that you're sort of animated about, Tim Walz. You found Tim, I don't know if repulsive is the right word, but just sort of antithetical. You were personally offended by Tim and what he was trying to represent, given that you...
Well, he attacked J.D. Vance for going to Yale. He said, like all of the people that I grew up with in the heartland, J.D. studied at Yale. And then he said in his however many years as a school teacher, none of his students went to Yale. Now, that second one is sort of an odd thing to brag about. But basically, he was suggesting that J.D. was not a real Midwesterner or Heartlander. And of course, this is a very stupid attack for someone who knows anything about J.D.'s life at all. And I was offended by it because I think there is a problem of sort of the Midwest attracting unambitious people who don't want to do great things. And there's such a great legacy of Midwesterners going out and building the world. Bob Noyce is one of my favorite ones. Bob Noyce was the founder of Intel. He grew up in Grinnell, Iowa, a tiny little Congregationalist town. And Grinnell College, this little Congregationalist liberal arts college, is very advanced in transistors in the 40s and 50s. And he goes and founds Intel, sends a bunch of money back to Grinnell. And you have all throughout these corporations, you have Midwesterners all over the place. And you have the great land grant universities of the Midwest, the University of Minnesota, Iowa State University, Norman Borlaug, who invented all of the drought-resistant strains of wheat that now feed the world, was this random Midwest guy. And when Tim Walz went after JD, he's basically celebrating the idea that if you're born in a troubled part of Ohio, you had better stay there or else you're a traitor to the people that you grew up with. Now, as we know, in Hillbillyology, JD had some tough words for the culture that he grew up in. But that was a much more loving portrait of it than screw you if you go to a good college and then move back to where you grew up. And so Walz is sort of dressing up in this Midwest skin suit where he wants to be a caricature that is for the MSNBC audience, basically. One of the things that people pointed out at the time was that he had a state fair hot dish, which is like a casserole recipe. And he's telling Kamala Harris in this campaign video that the only spice he knows is black pepper, but there were all sorts of very hot spices in the hot dish. And so he lied about it. He lied about not liking spicy food in order to turn himself into the caricature. I suppose you could compare this. You can compare the caricature to what Hillary Clinton did with the hot sauce and talking about grits during. She did live in Arkansas with Bill, who was actually from Arkansas. In fact, a few days ago, I had chicken at the Waffle House in Hope, Arkansas, which is the town where Bill Clinton grew up. I was driving through it. I wanted to see it for myself. Bill Clinton was actually from Arkansas, but he didn't caricature it. Walz did the caricature, and it wasn't even true. Hillary, when she did the caricature, it was a life that she had known. She was the first lady of Arkansas. She lived in Little Rock. It's a beautiful Southern culture, and she was a part of it. But she's not anymore. And she was trying to then sort of do it. You see this with the Kamala Harris shape-shifting accents. The Jamaican one, the sort of Hispanic accent, the very urban Black accent, and then her sort of normal accent. Do either of you know where she went to high school, where she spent her adolescent years? Montreal. She was in Quebec. But about Walz, his was the worst of all because it was not even inauthentic. It was a complete reversal because he thought the caricature would work better.
He was shucking and jiving for an audience, right? He was doing like a minstrel routine. That's what I think about him. He was doing white guy minstrel. The thing that like really set me off was when they did like the Walz Harris camo hats, and they're like, now we have a Kamala Harris hat, like a Tim Walz hat, just like you have Trump hats. And it's like all of that, even stuff like Yellowstone, right? Yellowstone, like the meme of Kevin Costner sitting on the pickup truck in his hat and like thoughtfully considering something, like all of that is meant to skin suit and minstrel show and adopt the aesthetics of being a quote regular white guy. And then magically, by the way, they're totally supplicative and controlled by like the people that watch MSNBC. And it's like
at the same time that they were trying to paint JD as this sort of alien. And I was offended for myself. I grew up in Iowa. I went to a good college. I spent a lot of time in Iowa, and I happen to admire JD Vance as one of the most inspiring political figures ever. And for the record, I totally disagree with him on a lot of economic points, but the facts of his life, I'm very proud that he was elected. I'd be very proud to see him as president. And I think that he represents this sort of mid-century Midwest thing that we used to have, and is one of these things that we need to cultivate it again, which is that that the kid from Ohio State University can do anything, and he doesn't have to absorb into the culture that dislikes him. And at the same time, he can have tough words for where he grew up. I could have things to criticize about Iowa. I could have things to criticize about Nebraska, Minnesota, and the way that we could make things better. It's the Tim Walz JD contrast was just so strong. It was lucky that we had them in the same place because the difference was so palpable.
And so is Hick Liberty really just kind of this like sideshow, sort of, relegated to the Beto's of the world, but not really what like.
Well, Beto almost won the first time, so I don't think it's not gonna die out. It's gonna die out in places that are super white and rural, though. That's the problem. It's like the Yellowstone comparison is perfect just because it doesn't work at all in Wyoming. You have like this like 92% white state. They just don't stand it. But HickLib does work in Minnesota. It does. The Minnesota Democrats are doing very well. It's like the most blue state we have. It's the only state that's not voted for a Republican since Nixon.
Yeah. So Nate Silver had this. He had this post. I think you can still find it. It was when I knew Trump was going to win the election. It was an article on 538 called "The Swingometer." You can flip the election, and you could change the turnout in different parts of America. You could say like, okay, this is the partisan affiliation, and then this is the turnout of like white, Black, Asian, Hispanic, or you could do men and women, or you could do college degrees. And I noticed if you just have a little bit of elevated white turnout, Trump wins the election by sweeping Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. And it's also, I was like a little bit bearish on 2020 and I'm very assured on 2024. But one of the things that I did is they had, this is in 2016, I guess I could use the census now, but they had imputed from American Community Survey cuts of data, like what the 2016 electorate would be from the prior census. And one of the things that I started doing, I should maybe spin it back up, was I was like, okay, let me find the most populated places in America that are non-Hispanic white and see what their like political polarity is. And like one of the conclusions that I ran into was that like there are places like Clare, Wyoming, that like, they're actually really hip. They're really like, they're cool place. There's a young bar culture there. And like, there are a lot of people there, but they're actually super left wing. They're like incredibly left wing. And then there are other places like, Hialeah, right? Like there are places in South Florida where like there really aren't that many non-Hispanic white people, but for whatever reason, they're also out-indexed and they're like really, really Republican leaning, or they're gonna just a little bit of shift in their partisan affiliation, and Trump just dominates in Florida. So the HICLIB stuff is like, the way I think about it is it's almost like a luxury belief. It's like if you're a particular kind, it's like an assemblage of luxury beliefs. If you're like a particular kind of white person who has zero diversity around them, but you're also not in one of the elite cities and like you don't want to backslide, you kind of associate to the views of progressives because those are, for now, the more fashionable ones. And it's like a way to kind of rationalize your situation. So you're not like a towering economic elite, like, rich white people in New York City, but you're not like, you're in Eau Claire, right? You're not like a master of the universe. So you have to orient yourself towards these like kind of, I think a lot of the Pacific Northwest is like this too. I think that's why white people in Washington state have just gone full libtard. Like, I think that's what's going on there.
I don't have a good mental model for this, so I won't contribute.
Well, it brings us full circle kind of to the conversation that's been happening the last few days. Is some people are basically saying, hey, are we really talking about like some DEI for sort of nativists or something?
No, I think that, for what it's worth, I think it's both true that to a certain extent, talent has been suppressed. That's largely an extent of the jobs not physically being in the places where the people are. But there are many, many cases of people coming out of the Midwest universities today that are white, that are male, that are total geniuses. And the internet has dramatically increased the sort of discovery capability of these people. Admittedly, it can feel like a small number, but there are amazing enterprises all over the US that are employing tons of Americans and creating jobs. I have friends that work at Cargill and various Coke Industries outfits or whatnot. I think that the white Americans wanting affirmative action frame is wrong, just because it's sort of absurd to ask them to compete against every single person on the earth, which is affirmative action. The reason why we can define it easily is because there's a closed pool of people where one group is getting extra points compared to the other. If you weren't even sure about who was in the pool, then there'd be such confusion that you just can't ask people to deal with that. I'm for the pool expanding somewhat, but that sort of expansion should be a fraction of the total pool rather than a multiple of it, which the sort of no borders libertarian would encourage. And I don't think that it's not the position with majority support. It doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, one interesting twist on this is like, as we've had more and more immigration to the United States, actually the goals of those initial affirmative action programs have been like subverted. So there's a funny thing where
well, you won't get me to complain about that.
Yeah, it's kind of unique, right? So Ann Coulter has made this point before, where she's, we do need to do certain things to just specifically address like the problems African Americans face because they are the descendants of slaves. But this is totally different from anything that we would ever do for like even a legal immigrant, right? Because they showed up here. They chose to get into the Thunderdome with us. We owe them nothing. And one instance of this that I find very interesting is if you Google African American or Black student gets admission to all Ivy League universities, there are like several cases of where they'll be like, yeah, this person got admission to all Ivy League universities. And sometimes the articles will admit it and other times they don't, but their last name is Nigerian. And like, the universities are saying like, oh, we have this, this amount of our student population is Black and this amount of our student population is diverse or whatever. And it's like, when Americans hear that there are preferences for Blacks in university admissions, they think what that means, because it's the most natural interpretation, is like, okay, yeah, American universities have these preferences for like Black candidates from Baltimore or St. Louis or whatever, who are like African Americans who were descendants of slaves that are, doing awesome stuff. They don't think that it means that a wealthy Nigerian family immigrates to the United States and then like, oh yeah, like, I don't know, Lindsay Nkwolo gets like 8 different, amazing universities to say yes to her, and then she can have her pick of them.
It's Nigerians in St. Louis getting affirmative action and the people in Ferguson down the road. But I think part of the reason why that why I'm not persuaded by the Coulter point is because these things don't work. The universal evidence all across the world is that affirmative action does not work. And so part of the reason why, of the reason why the idea,
I think she would agree with that.
but that negates the idea that we actually do owe special things. And what the data show are that immigrants take way less welfare. And so we don't owe them anything. And in many cases, they don't expect it. I say that there's a difference with illegal immigrants and what has happened in Europe. It is certainly the case that people are moving there in order to take advantage of welfare. I think the truth is in America, it's still quite difficult to take advantage of welfare if you're just showing up randomly. We have a notoriously low welfare state. You're not going to be able to get on Social Security.
That's not totally true. I mean, so like one of the kind of the more egregious examples of this is New York State. They actually have, it's really fucked up. They call it the Office of New Americans, and they like specifically deal with like illegal aliens.
New York State is crazy though. Those people vote for that. Yeah, it's not material to me. Should a state be able to decide to do that? It's probably
no. No, I don't think they should. I also think that a substantial amount of the New York State electorate is just kind of illegally here or born to people illegally here.
I would totally support a federal amendment to basically ban welfare for immigrants at the federal level. I'm not sure if you could do that at the state level, but I wouldn't mind if they did. I think the point is though, is that we don't have a European phenomenon in the US where people are getting tens of thousands of dollars per year out of the system. It's not true. The money's not there. And that's part of the reason why America is able to more successfully integrate these people. And I'm totally against the tens of millions of people that have come in, and I want a large number of them gone. And I think that whatever the number is will probably be settled around the right level of what people think the cost benefit is. Maybe it should always be more. It's amazing the extent to which the effects of it have only really showed up on the border towns and in the big cities. But if you go to random places throughout the US, there's actually a very high capacity to absorb people because they're not being given the welfare. Like you would notice the trillions of dollars missing if a European thing had happened. And that's why I think it'll also be easier to send many of them back. You see what the Europeans are having to do. The Swedish government is having to offer migrants $100,000 to go back because they're all in these welfare programs. And so to them, it's like, oh, what a value proposition. $100,000 to get to send these people back because they're paying them so much in welfare that the European Union and European economic sort of authorities decided was going to be the standard for random people showing up on boats. So yeah, I totally agree that like we do have special obligations to our citizen friends, and that's why we have Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and welfare for citizens, and we don't for immigrants, and that should be ironclad, in my opinion. Any law to cut down on any welfare being given to any immigrant, I would be in favor of. Yeah, so I think that's probably the more concerning immigrant interest group compared to Indians. It's like groups that want to, the Mexican lobby is big on this, make it very easy for remittances to be totally untaxed or for illegals to get state benefits. Like that to me is much more destructive to the polity. And it leaves me dumbfounded that Indians get so much hate. It's because the Indians are online and in English. And the ones that are online and in English are some of the most annoying human beings that most people will ever encounter. That maybe is an underrated point, is that like these problems that are sort of unique to the Anglosphere, the one place in Canada where the Indians haven't gone is Quebec. Because in Quebec, there's no right to speak English written into the local laws. In all of Canada, you have the right to speak English except in Quebec. And so you let in a few million people, they're all going to go to the same places where it's going to be easiest for them. And I think it's great that we don't have such ethnic enclaves in the US. Of course, you can point to a few of them. It's very sparse, and that's a good thing. We should not allow that type of thing to develop. It's funny, where I live in Iowa, most of the time I'm in Texas, but my farm in Iowa is about 20 minutes from a settlement called the Maharishi Vedic City. This was set up, you should take a look at this. It was set up by a bunch of gurus back in the 70s and 80s. They have Vedic architecture, and It's one of the largest like ghee producing regions of the United States. They make clarified butter. And so the dairy industry of Southeast Iowa has been mobilized to create sort of Indian dairy products. I don't think that there's an especially high likelihood of what happened in Canada happening here, where you have sort of whole Indian subcommunities in university towns putting out these sort of scammy notices where it's like, oh, how to get free food at college events or whatnot, which is sort of low trust behavior going on. I don't see much of it, and I'm very thankful for that. Yeah. And then you obviously have some other situations where, like Aurora or Springfield, where there's clearly been a sort of engineered disaster, or Minneapolis. I mean, there are sort of Somali enclaves in Minneapolis, and I think this is a very negative thing. It's unfortunately a deliberate choice by the sort of local political leadership. Yeah.
We're I want to be mindful of time. We're a bit over, but this has been a great conversation. Max, is there anything we haven't gotten to that you want to make sure to leave our listeners with, or shall we? Go for it?
I would like to. I would like to make the case for why, generally speaking, the benefits outweigh the costs of what we call high skilled immigration, even with the sort of stuff around the edges that is not high skill. I think that the American economy since World War II has been these corporations that have been getting bigger. And I think that you have this phenomenon in the 90s, 2000s, 2010s, where cheap IT labor, largely enabled by the H-1B visa program and other types of temporary work visas, enabled American IT businesses to get huge, gargantuan in scale, where today they're collectively worth tens of trillions of dollars and make up our largest exports, with the exception of oil now. And the effects on this throughout the rest of the economy are sort of invisible sometimes. All of the pension systems around the United States rely entirely on these businesses and their ability to print cash from getting money all around the world. They pay immense sums of tax. Apple alone expected this year to pay a $30 billion tax bill. They create jobs all throughout the country, even though they're also creating jobs in China and downstream and hiring on the H-1B. And I think that the positive sum effects of this are real and ought to be stood up for, even while acknowledging that there's a lot of distrust around this because of nonsense like the idea of a soccer coach being hired on the H-1B when there are multiple candidates or something. And I think that one of the things that is slightly wrong about this debate, especially as it relates to Silicon Valley, probably not as it relates to other sectors, is the idea that that the primary motivation is sort of undercutting wages. I think that that's wrong. I think that Silicon Valley has been known to pay single individuals billions of dollars. Google gave Noam Shazir $3.5 billion in a lump sum to return to Google. Tesla tried to pay Elon tens of billions, hundreds of billions. Apple paying an H-1B person to the tune of $400,000 or $500,000 in base salary and making up to $1 million with options. It's not. I don't think it's cost undercutting. I think that might take place in other parts of the economy, but I think that that's one of the sort of fallacies. And the other thing is that, and maybe I'll send the link to this around, when people adjust for age and other factors, it turns out that in many cases, the visa holders are making more. And that to me was something that was surprising. I took it on its face that H-1Bs were almost universally being paid 20 to 30% lower. And it turns out that those numbers were unadjusted for things like age and years of experience. And I was super surprised to learn that. And I'm still sort of digesting that information. But yeah, so I think that the idea of Silicon Valley undercutting wages, I think that people should take Elon seriously when he says there is a shortage of talent in terms of the people that are really going to build the future, even if it's, we could probably find some of those accounting and tax roles that should be more stringently, we should more stringently require the companies to find Americans. And going through these sort of H-1B dashboards has been a very illuminating experience, where there are some of these jobs where it's like, really, did you really do the legally required process here to try to find Americans? Sort of skeptical about that. But yeah, I think I take Elon's perspective on this very seriously. And listen to what Tim Cook said about engineers in China. It's like he used to talk about like if you wanted to like get a conference of like computer engineers, people who can deal with motherboards and whatnot, in China, you could fill like a 50,000 person soccer stadium in one province. And in America, it's like a few thousand people in the whole country. I'm not saying we shouldn't address that problem and like dramatically try to increase the number of people, but it's just one of those things where it's like we can spend a lot of time arguing against reality or try to harness it for our best outcomes. And one of my firm beliefs is that we can harness this, and it's a unique power of the country. And this has a tangible effect on the lives of teachers and firefighters and people all throughout the country. And what we really need to do is make sure that those benefits can be enjoyed by more people, rather than say that the benefits don't matter in the first place. I think that we'd be sorry if the tech economy stopped growing. So that's my sort of piece.
Bronson, is there any? Do you want to let that rest, or do you want to?
Yeah, well, I think I mentioned this in our part 2, right? Like I trust Elon when Elon Musk says, "Look at my businesses," right? I don't think he's capital constrained in hiring. I think he is talent constrained in hiring, right? I believe him. And then I think Americans look at the H-1B petition forms and they see McKinsey hiring lots of entry-level accountants, and they're like, "What the fuck," right? I think that's a totally genuine thing. I guess what I would leave people with is if like you're still super worried, if you're still super concerned, like I'll say again the thing that I mentioned before. I said it in the reply to our friend Joe Lonsdale. Like, look, I'm easy to find. You can get in touch with me. Like, actually, all of us are easy to find. Like, you can get in touch with us. Like, if you are one of these people, I mean, I don't know what the composition of your audience is, and like you feel that you've been hard done by as like a straight white male or whatever. Any number of permutations, right? Like straight white Christian male, Christian, like whatever. Like just reach out. Like we can help you. Like this is like we're actually pretty good at doing that. And the final thing is JD Vance has just retweeted I think a very great post. It's from Steve Cortez, and it's a quote that he had at the RNC. One of the things you hear people say sometimes is that America is an idea. America is not just an idea. It is a group of people with a shared history and a common future. It is, in short, a nation. Trust Trump. Trust the people around Trump. Trust JD Vance. This is our vice president-elect, a very online guy who, but beloved ex-mutual as well, right? Like, I think people who are catastrophizing right now about the direction of the country because of like one or two like really ginned up narratives, like you won, and things are going to be great.
We're very lucky to have it. We're very lucky to have a guy like JD. You've spurned two thoughts, so if I may, Erik, maybe one of the most inspiring things about this whole ordeal, even though some of the discourse was quite jarring and aggressive, is the extent to which a real conversation took place among people with actual power to sort of influence these things. And what I sort of learned is that I think the delta between the two positions is much lower than we think. There are definitely extremes where it's like, let all the Indians in, keep everyone out. Neither of those are sort of in vogue at the White House. I think that David Sachs probably learned a few things, because I know I learned a few things and had my perspective change. And that is like a very significant thing, because it's one of these unique things to see where the continuing resolution on the Hill got killed after a huge sort of right-wing online discourse about it. And not all decisions are going to be improved by that process, but I don't think it hurts to have real sort of discussions about these things. And I don't think that any of the sort of actors are doomed because of what they said. I think that the discussion was real. And the last thing is on what JD said. I totally agree with JD. One of the phrases that I do sort of have a spin on is people say, America is not an economic zone. And I agree with that. It's not just an economic zone. But if you ignore the sort of economic benefits of these things, you don't end up helping the nation part of it either. And I really don't want to see the effects of real economic collapse happen in America just to have a more firm feeling that we control things. I think that the benefits are underrated, and that people don't really understand what it would mean for things to slow down broadly.
That's well put. I just want to quote this sort of but as a liberal sort of writer, Zaid Jilani, he said, commenting on the last few days, he said, the way the right, including the Trump admin and Trump orbit people, are openly debating immigration issues is pretty much unheard of on the left. There's nativism and racism in there, but there's also substantive debates you just don't see among Democrats. Some Democrats argue that immigration chaos is hurting them politically. Some argue that it's not, but Democrats rarely debate the issue on its merits anymore. They're all for high levels of immigration philosophically, populists taking a back seat.
And now Trump's having dinner with Bill Gates. That's what's happening right now. And it's like Mark Cuban, who was, I like Mark. I admire Mark, actually. Ostensibly, he was one of Kamala's primary campaign surrogates and could not get in touch with her. Bill Gates, meanwhile, can go talk to Trump at the height of this thing. Trump world is going to land on an answer somehow, but it's going to have been affected by this conversation, which is really fun to see. And in the end, it's Trump's movement. It's Trump's presidency. He's the president. That's the person who matters the most. But I do think it's great that he has this sort of court that he can call on, including people who tried to destroy him or were really against him, because he cares what they think.
That's a great note to add on. Max Bronson, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, Erik here. At Turpentine, we're building the first media outlet for tech people by tech people. We're the network behind the show you're listening to right now. We have a slate of hit shows across a range of topics and industries, from our AI and investing cluster of podcasts to shows that drive the conversation in tech with the most interesting thinkers, founders, investors, and influencers, like Econ 102 with Noah Smith. We're launching new shows every week, and we're looking for industry-leading sponsors. If you think that might be you and your company, email me at erikaturpentine.co. That's ERIK at turpentine.co, and let's partner together.